Keep in touch with the Wolf Connection podcast on our Instagram handle at the Wolf Connection Pod, or email us your questions, comments, and guest ideas to podcast@wolfconnection.org. Thank you for your support, and howls to you all. Welcome to the Wolf Connection podcast. I'm your host, John Kalfa. We are very excited and really honored to have this individual on the podcast. I just finished reading the revised and updated edition of The Emotional Lives of Animals. A leading scientist explores animal joy, sorrow, and empathy and why they matter. If you have not read this book, read it. It's such an incredible read, very fascinating. The stories in here are fantastic. And this is 17 years from the first initial publishing. This has now come out, and you can get it, I think, wherever books are sold. He is a professor emeritus. I probably butchered that. I'm sorry.
Emeritus.
Emeritus. Thank you, Mark. He taught at CU Boulder for 32 years, Ecology and Evolutionary Biology, and is a fellow for Animal Behavior Society. Among many of his other accolades, he's a publisher of 30 to 40 books. Marc Bekoff. Mark, it's a pleasure to finally meet you, to have you on here and just talk about your work. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, thank you. Been thinking a lot about the Colorado Wolves and their project, and just a lot of. I'm really a fan of an ever-growing discipline called compassionate conservation, which really is kind of an alternative to traditional, more bloody conservation, where the among the guidelines is that the life of every single individual matters, sentient or not. But a lot of what I do really usually just comes home to writing and thinking deeply about the emotional lives of animals. So
it's and like I said, reading this, it was just such an eye-opening experience for me, because I've read some of your work online already, but this really contextualized why I can't see anyone else who's leading in this type of area. Why is it so important to think about compassionate conservation and to be involved in the emotional lives of animals, as opposed to the regular techniques that we think about with conservation?
Well, animals have a point of view, each individual. So one thing it stresses is that not only are they sentient, feeling beings who deserve to live because they're alive, they have what we call intrinsic or inherent value, but they also have a point of view. And one of the exciting things, I might be jumping ahead a bit, but really one of the exciting things is that each individual has their own unique personality and their own unique view of the world, just like humans do. So there are some commonalities, of course, but that's a really important message, that what bothers you might not bother me, or what bothers me might not bother you. But it's also important because we're living in the Anthropocene, which people call the age of humanity, and I call it the rage of inhumanity, not only for the work that we're doing, or not only for the effect we're having on animals in labs and zoos and, in captivity in general, but also for wild animals. I mean, I know it's kind of a bumper sticker to say that we're losing biodiversity. A lot of ecosystems are losing their integrity because of the loss of species, both animal and plant, flora and fauna and flora, and also just because if we keep going like this, and I'm a card-carrying optimist, but if we keep going like this, we're doomed, and so are future generations. I mean, it sounds alarmist, but it is, because there's no way that what we're doing, and with the increasing, the number of humans on the planet, that it's sustainable. And I know that's a word that is beaten around a lot, but if you do the math, you'll just see there's going to be more demand than there are supplies in all areas, food, housing, where people are going to live. And I live in Boulder, Colorado, which is I wouldn't say it's a high-end community, although housing is expensive. But, I go to the food store and there's empty shelves still. So supply is really important. So, and I don't think we have the right to steal the future of youngsters. So that's what I spend my day thinking about, but always with a positive view to the future.
And I'm glad you brought up biodiversity so early on in the conversation. We just talked yesterday about just considering this topic maximally important going forward and trying to work it in as often as possible. So just in the spirit of that, in your own words, what is biodiversity and why is it so important to prioritize it for our future?
I mean, the way I look at biodiversity, and I'm sure that there are formulas, would be maybe the number of different species in a given area. So I mean, with some insects, you could look at the number of different species within 3 square inches. But on a more macro level, how many different species are there in a certain area, and how are they doing? And so they might each have different needs, but are we meeting their needs? So that's what I would call biodiversity. And in ecosystems that are fairly untouched, biodiversity is really important for maintaining the integrity of the ecosystem. That's not meant to say that it's not important in areas where we trespass, which is just about everywhere. But it's kind of like just a good measure of who's out there and how many different species there are, and it could be how many individuals of a given species there are too, in terms of their abundance.
Speaking and staying, I think, on this just for a second, along with the reintroduction that happened in Colorado with the wolves, and you sent us that awesome video of those 3 wolf pups playing, and you wrote an essay pretty much right after that. Again, in your own words, how does the reintroduction impact these ecosystems and this biodiversity that we talk about, that Colorado now has? I think all of the major fauna now, at least the major carnivores now back in the state, other than the grizzlies. Other than the grizzly, but there are black bears.
Oh yeah, So
right
at my door in the mountains. Yep.
But just to have, I think, the presence of now all of these these megafauna now back inside of the state. Where do you see this heading for Colorado? Is this the beacon for change, or is this something that will obviously take time as they reintroduce more wolves and these packs get settled and everything sort of figures itself out?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, from a historical point of view, it's nice to repatriate, formerly native animals. So that's good. I'm an ethologist, but I also do behavioral ecology. So ecosystems evolve depending on who's there. So when you have a major member of an ecosystem, like say wolves, and they disappear, the ecosystems in which they used to live, because they disappeared 90 years ago, give or take, have really evolved. So bringing them back, one could say is an insult, and I don't mean that in a negative way, or an assault on their former homes. So there's no doubt, because they are so important, they're just so principal, that ecosystems will change. They're not going to go back to what they were when wolves were here, because so much has happened in them before, including trespassing by humans and building, doing development, for example. But I like that feeling that, at some point we will have all the different species who were here, say 100 years ago, however many years ago we're concerned with. But it's also an assault on some people's ways of life. You're introducing a predator. The predator I mean, predators eat other animals. And, I wish that evolution didn't go that way, but it has. And we're not going to stop it. So wolves are highly social, highly intelligent, highly emotional, and pretty efficient predators. They do not get a meal every time they try, but they're highly evolved, and they've evolved a lot of social behaviors, and pack living to get the food they need and to defend their meals and to defend their territory. So it's major, and it's also having, I was going to say going to have, but they're here. It's having a major effect, or potential effect, on the lives of the humans who live around them, especially if they're making food animals. So I'm very happy to take both sides, but I think that, the people who are affected the most directly because of their proximity to where the wolves are, may and likely will pay a bigger, quote, price for their presence. Okay, I understand that. But, I feel that the plan has taken into account their needs, their compensation packages up to $15,000, which is a very generous amount. I mean, I feel sorry for all the livestock or all the food animals who are killed, because I'm really against that I don't like thinking about them being harmed that way. But, I think that, and it's going to take time. And, some of the recent pieces I've written, they breed once a year, where I'm very surprised that there is a pack with 3 pups, known pups, and a mother and a father. So mother and a father and their children. And a lot of people might have predicted that wasn't going to happen the first year, because here you have 10 wolves who are released on their own. They go off. They need to find one another, court, reproduce, and then find a place to den, and then bring baby wolves to live. So I think it would be really naive to think that a project like this will not have a major effect on some people rather than others.
I feel that this leads into a lot of one of the major, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, one of the major things that you talk about in this book is about anthropomorphism. I think I said that right finally. And you talk about this, about social, Stephen and I have discussed this at length, social carrying capacity for animals, arguments for and against it. From your perspective, because you have been doing this for many, many years, just describe what anthropomorphism is, and why it is such a hotly debated, contested topic. Maybe it's starting to lessen now, per what you wrote in the book in the updated version. But why is this such a contentious topic for folks in and out of the scientific community, as you just described, your feelings for livestock that are not only being killed by wild animals, but also those that are being killed by humans for consumption? So there's a lot to that, but just basics on that. Yeah.
Glad you brought that up, John. It's a really important issue. Well, first of all, the good news is some people get hung up on the notion of anthropomorphism and still write about it, but the vast majority of people I know have just said, okay, that's the only way we can really understand what other animals are thinking and feeling. So anthropomorphism, really simply put, is the attribution of human traits to non-human entities. Okay, so I don't consider an animal an entity, but people talk about violent thunderstorms. That would be anthropomorphic. It's not like it's not like the thunderstorm has an intention to be violent. They just are because of the nature of thunderstorms. So it's really interesting that over the past, I'd say 25 or 30 years, but even more recently, people just don't get hung up on it anymore. A lot of people got hung up on it early on, because if you start attributing human emotions to non-humans, they can't be used and abused in the way people do. So I wrote about years ago about what I called the as if disclaimer, meaning, well, dogs are only acting as if they're happy or sad when they're, happy when they're playing, sad when they lose a friend, sad when they can't have their favorite fruit, et cetera. And you could, generalize that to other animals. But, the story that I have in The Emotional Lives of Animals was very revealing to me, because it dealt with an elephant in the zoo who clearly was unhappy. And I made a comment that, oh, look, she looks unhappy. And a guy I was with who was, involved in running zoos said, well, you're being anthropomorphic. She's not unhappy, she's happy. And then all of a sudden it got really quiet, because saying an animal is happy is also anthropomorphic. It's attributing a human trait to a non-human animal in this case. But there's been a lot of research recently on how anthropomorphism is good for the animals. And I don't mean, I'm not sitting here saying, well, yeah, all the dogs I lived with or the cats I know can do, differential calculus, blah, 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 but they do have feelings. And so the fact that they're sentient have feelings and their own feelings, is really important. And so I think a lot of people have really cut back on that. And there's been some research done that anthropomorphism is really good for bridging the gap between humans and non-humans. Not surprisingly, but it is. And once again, I call it biocentric anthropomorphism. I call it biocentric because I take into account, if you will, the biology of the animal, the taxonomy of the animal. And we need to do it, as my colleague Gordon Burghardt calls it. He calls it critical anthropomorphism. So we're not just throwing stuff out like, that animals have the same feelings we do. I don't think they do. I think that they have the same feelings, but they feel them in their own, if you will, species typical way, because they have different sensory systems. And then individuals within a species feel their emotions in a different way. So the example I use is that my joy or grief might not be the same as yours, but it doesn't mean I have it and you don't, or you have it and I don't. And that sounds really simplistic, but really what it means is that, we each as individuals experience the world in certain ways, individual or individualistic ways. So I really think that recently a lot of people who jumped on the anthropomorphism bandwagon were doing it because if you deny animals have feelings, then you can do anything, or, feel pain or joy, you could do anything you want to them. It was really a gateway into, I think, some excessive abuse. So from that point of view, it's good. And the reason that I like this study that was done that shows that it helps us connect to other animals is because it shows what I call these shared emotions. And these shared emotions serve as a social glue. That's why, pet rocks and pet robotic dogs didn't make it, because there's the shared emotion between, say, a dog or another companion animal and they're human, and it functions as a social glue.
So describe how one makes what you might consider a confident distinction where there's little doubt that you're identifying something as emotion in the way we understand that word. Like what says to you, or how do you make that distinction between instinct and emotion? And is that an important instinct? Or is that an important distinction? Or what do you think about just how you identify something as this animal is doing this by default, or this animal is doing this consciously?
Yeah, that's a great question. So people think about what they call primary and secondary emotions, for example. So, a primary emotion might be fear. So it means, or like a response where a young mammal goes to the teat to get milk. it's a response that has to be hardwired because it has to be done correctly the first time. You know, they can learn how to modify them, which they do, but something happens like a stimulus response relationship, and they just do the right thing. They hear a loud sound or a soft sound and they respond appropriately. So in birds, for example, when they're in the egg, and if you can, X-ray and watch them, you can play the mother's call or a soft sound, and they will behave in a way that leads you to believe that they would be approaching the sound. And if you play a loud, raucous sound or an alarm call, they'll freeze in the egg. That would be hardwired. They have not had the ability to have an experience in the real world of those sounds. Okay. But with the more, I don't call them complex. Some people do, but with other emotions like happiness or joy, well, I mean, Darwin thought that those were primary emotions too, but they may not be as simple because a certain play partner may make a dog happy while the presence of a potential play partner might scare them. Okay, so with the more complex or secondary emotions, they could be modified more to context. So somebody recently asked me, and I thought they were joking, but they weren't. Do dogs really enjoy playing? And I went, they do. I don't think that's debatable. And I think they wanted to write a paper on it. And they said, well, how could I know this? And I said, go to a dog park. I mean, sorry, just watch them. And, so that was kind of a little facetious, but, with these emotions, they'll seek out play. They'll do it till they're dead tired, jump up and do it again. They won't take no for an answer when it gets rough. Dogs and other animals have the ability to modulate them to make sure that play stays the name of the game. And you don't do that with something you don't enjoy. I mean, you just don't. And then the other thing is, because I'm a field ethologist and ecologist, it would be bizarre to think that animals like wolves or other highly social animals, elephants and birds, would not evolve these complex emotions, a wide spectrum of emotions, because they facilitate forming and maintaining the integrity of a group. Even if I don't know you and I were with you for a while, you'd get to know me, I'd get to know you, I'd get to know things that you might not like, I'd get to know things that you like, and then how do we work together synergistically? And that's exactly what the formation of a band of chimpanzees or a flock of birds or a pack of wolves entails. So they've got to have the raw ingredients on the menu in order to form these sometimes real complicated or complex social networks.
Why is this so? How on this specifically? Because this is so relational to obviously the human species, because we all form groups, we have family structures, we see all these things. This is how we compare a lot of this to wolves. When you're talking about conservation for wolves, many folks use this line of discussion as opposed to the ecology biology part and say they are forming their own family groups. Have you seen over the course of your time in the field, in the classroom, your research, the places you've been and seen, this paradigm, you talk about this paradigm shift of people rethinking this in different species of animals, like you say, elephants, birds, chimpanzees, wolves, even any of these flora or fauna where people are starting to understand, like you say, these groups are formed, these feelings are met, and it's very similar to what we experience in our own lives, and we just haven't made the connection, or we're starting to try and make these connections now in 2024.
Yeah, that's a great statement and a great question. Yeah, I mean, when you become more sensitive to the possibility of something happening, you tend to look for it. It doesn't mean you see it if it's not there. But right, I mean, the very similar mechanisms could be involved in the formation of groups of humans as groups of wolves, chimpanzees, birds. And, there's fully growing literature on the emotional lives of insects who are highly social. So, yeah, I mean, I think one of the reasons, like I said before, that people are much more open to it now is because they might think of the human example. For example, when I say just, I mean, we're just mammals, just like dogs and wolves and chimpanzees and elephants and giraffes and rats and mice are, mammals. But a lot of really interesting research is showing. So, for example, do animals care for one another? Do they take care of other individuals who are in need? And now we know mice and rats can read the facial expressions of other mice and rats. Rats will rescue familiar rats from being trapped. And one study showed that they would do it rather than eat chocolate. And I always say, well, I'm not sure I would, but but yeah, then again, because I'm a field worker, people are looking at long-term data in terms of the formation of social groups. They change because individuals leave, they leave. They might just disperse, or they might pass away, so they've left. How do new members get incorporated into a group? And a lot of commonality across different species, in all honesty, is very simple. That they're open to certain individuals rather than others, and they're probably open, to individuals with whom they can communicate. I love the word grok from Robert Heinlein's Stranger in a Strange Land, because the word grok, Grok, means just being in tune with others without having to think about it. And yeah, they do. I mean, we all feel that way with people. Sometimes you meet a person and you're in tune within 10 seconds, and maybe more in tune than you are with people who you really like, who you've known forever. So it's just something fast. And, I've spent a lot of time at dog parks writing my dog books or getting information. And really, you see that right away. People tell you the stories. They'll go, I don't know why Rory, my dog, likes Alex in a heartbeat and still might not really like Harry, who he's known for 5 years. What do you think? And I said, well, I don't know, but you could say it's the same mechanism. Maybe there's some neural hormonal response. It makes him feel good, and that's why he likes Harry. But the fact is, that he's preferring, Harry over Sam or something like that. So, once again, from an evolutionary point of view, you'd really like to have that kind of mechanism. So if an individual leaves a wolf pack or a group of elephants or, another social group, when they're on their own, they may meet an individual with whom they feel really close really fast. And especially if mating's on the horizon, for making more of them. So, yeah.
So is that considered, is there an emotional component there? Like what you just said, if maybe a dog doesn't like another dog, it could be hormonal, but he's certainly acting as a human who doesn't like a person because of their personality. So is there a distinction between why the dog looks like he doesn't like somebody versus why a human might look like they don't like somebody?
No, I mean, it could be very similar. So there's a chemical hormone called oxytocin, and people call it the love hormone.
Yeah, I see.
And it go across all mammals. So no, I mean, that's a great question, because a real major message that maybe it's not as apparent to people who don't sort of live what I live every day, but context is so important, so if you're a playful human or you're afraid of something, you might have the same hormonal response as another mammal. So the hormonal or neural response would, if strictly speaking, emotions and feelings are different. The emotion is sort of more of a neural hormonal response in the body. that emotes you. It gets you to do something. And the feeling you have is the expression of the emotions. Most people use them interchangeably. I do because it's just easier. Okay. And there's such a tight link between having some response in the body or, in your brain included, that might then lead you to be more likely to run away than approach, or approach then run away, or try to become friends when you're uncertain because you're getting certain signals that, yeah, that dog over there looks like a nice dog. I'd like to be their friend. And you approach and they growl, and then you walk away and you try it again. And maybe after a while they accept you, so in my eyes, there's no reason to think that there isn't a similar feeling of joy or happiness or grief or uncertainty. But once again, it would be really individualistic. But the neuroimaging studies are showing pretty well that, like in dogs, when you put a dog in a fMRI machine and look at their brain firing, and you create a situation in which that dog might feel jealous, that the same areas of the brain fire as they do in humans. So you've got this homology or something like that. So it's interesting, but we are all mammals, So, the upshot of that, of course, is that you're seeing behaviors that in a human or a non-human primate, like a great ape, you might call jealousy. So why not call them in dogs? And they're behaving in the way that a dog would behave. I want that food. I want that sleeping bed. I want the company of that human, and so some people say, well, I'm breaking it down and I'm making it too simple. No, I really don't think I am. I think people make it a lot more complex because they're so anthropocentric and they think we are special. And I always say we are special in some ways. So too are dogs and frogs and toads and wolves and ants. The reason I mention that is because we're really good at building these hierarchies, these pyramids where we place ourselves above and separate from other animals, which is absurd. And one of the offshoots of that, which you may have read in the book, is that the Federal Animal Welfare Act in the United States, what they actually have a section in there where they say we redefine the word animal to exclude rats and mice and birds and fishes and other animals. So I always joke about it to say, well, that's just stupid biology. Rats and mice and other animals aren't plants. And try explaining it to a 5-year-old. and I always think that, if you can't explain it to a 5-year-old, and they keep questioning you, that's wrong. So I use that example because people have been protesting against it, including a few scientists, for decades. But as of today, rats and mice are defined by the Federal Animal Welfare Act of the United States as not being animals. Why? There's a lot of money in producing lab animals, and they use them by the millions or billions worldwide for research. Yeah. Pretty self-serving.
So maybe the issue the reason we can't kind of close the gap and say, oh, animals do have similar feelings to humans, is because we're giving maybe too much credit to our emotional intelligence when some of it is probably just hormonal or just responses to things in the same way of this dog at the dog park is having.
Well, yeah, psychologists have said that there's not a lot of innate fears, but young kids, and I don't know how robust it is, but I've talked to people who I trust that, there seems to be what they call an innate fear of snakes among young kids. I know some young kids who love snakes.
Yeah, my son loves snakes.
Right. And when you say innate, it doesn't mean that everyone has it, but right. I can remember when I was young, I hadn't thought about it this way. When I went into this apartment house where I lived, sometimes it was dark in the entrance and in the elevator, and a loud noise would make me freeze. because I don't want to necessarily run away and I don't want to necessarily approach it. And certainly if you're in an elevator, there ain't nowhere you can go. So you might not want to run away and call attention to yourself. So that is getting back to that really good question before. So thinking that birds are hardwired in the egg to approach or do movements that would result in approaching a certain stimulus or movements to avoid it makes full sense, because if you don't do it right the first time, you're going to have a pretty short life.
Yeah. But then animals do learn. They don't, even those things that we might call innate fears. On the East Coast, people used to put statues of coyotes up in their yard or whatever to keep deer out of the yard. And once deer realize they're not real coyotes, they just ignore the darn thing.
Oh yeah.
So they do learn. Well, so the rat thing that you were saying, that it was observed that rats would save familiar rats, but they would ignore unfamiliar rats in the same scenario, or how?
That's more or less it. So what's interesting there is that you would expect evolutionarily, that there would be something built in to save your genes.
Exactly.
Genes. Right.
So then the question is that what makes us different kind of from animals? That may have an emotional component, and it obviously also has some sort of instinctual or innate component, like you're talking about in terms of genes, but the humans can sort of override their innate tendency towards something and do something anyway. So for example, there's no scenario in which I would say, I'm only going to save someone who's in my gene pool from harm. I will save John, who's not in my gene pool, from getting hit by a car, because I can sort of override that animalistic feeling that this is an emotionally charged thing maybe, and also instinctual specifically catered towards my gene pool. Is that kind of that overriding of that natural instinct? Is that what makes us different?
No, because other animals will do it in a group. So years ago, I wrote about the notion of familiarity. And so familiarity does not necessarily mean genetically identical, right? So groups of wolves, groups of chimpanzees will have outsiders come in, for example. So it's that social familiarity that could override it. And also like interesting studies that have been done on mice, where if you take very young mice and you take the odor of, say, 4 mice from litter 1 and 4 from litter 2, and you swap them early on, they don't differentiate from 1 from 2. Yeah. Or you could take a swab of, take a Q-tip and take a swab from 1 litter and put it on a litter mate, and they might not form that relationship. So what's hardwired in there is olfactory recognition. And maybe psychologists have studied it, but once again, sometimes for me, I might feel more immediately and say naturally attracted to another human being, male or female, than to others. But sometimes you don't know why. It could be behaviorally. It could, my friend used to say, well, it could be because they laugh at your dumb jokes, whatever. But we really don't know. And one of the things I think is really important in humans is, we're visual animals, but so we see well, we hear well, but it could be odor. There's a lot going on there. And non-human animals, wolves, insects, birds we don't know about, although we're realizing birds now have a better sense of smell than they were given credit for. Odor seems to be very important. And among dogs, for example, they use odors for detecting bombs and certain diseases and things like that. So just because we don't overtly do it or realize what's going on, odor might be more important to us than we realize. And that might be part of the natural attraction to an other human being, or repulsion. We just don't know.
Is this similar to what you discussed too in the book about when you the chapter about honor among beasts, where you discuss like wild justice and empathy and fair play? This seems a lot sort of tied into that. Is that all similar to what we've been talking about for the last few minutes? Is really just about how this is relating to humans, and we're starting to identify this stuff a little bit more and more.
Yeah, it surely could be, because forming close relationships entails a lot of time and energy, and especially among wild animals, they've got a hard life out there. They have to be very careful of how they use their finite time and energy. And yeah, I mean, so the example we use is, say, play behavior, and we see that dogs, but it could be other mammals, wolves and gorillas and chimpanzees and zebras, they want to play with one another. And one of the rules, I talk about the golden rules of play, but one of the overriding rules is that I want to play with you, so I'm not trying to eat you, beat you up, or mate with you. And they've got to communicate this, and they communicate it. They try to communicate it before they interact, and they might communicate it during an interaction when they bite too hard, or they mount another animal, or they slam into them too hard, and they stop. And, in this case, they do what we call a play bow. And that says, I still want to play. I'm sorry. And you see that in humans, how many times, I mean, for me, but I'm sure for everyone, you say something and you go, oh, it was only a joke. Or you might just be friendly with someone and push them a little hard, and they look at you and go, well, wait a minute. And you go, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to push you that hard. It's only a joke. So we can verbally retract these mixed messages, but other animals need to do something. So what we found is they tend to use a play signal to say, I'm sorry I jumped on you. I'm sorry I mounted you. I'm sorry I bit you. And they do a little play bow, say, and that establishes the play atmosphere.
So how does the spectrum of sentience work in your mind? Like, all animals are sentient, or certain animals of a certain nature or a certain level of intelligence, in quotation, cross over the line from insentient to sentient?
It's a great question. Right now, I tend to not draw any lines. And one of the reasons is because there's some just really great, like I said before, some really great research being done on insects. I mean, really hardcore research that shows that it's just undeniable that they feel certain emotions. Okay. So some
We're talking about ants, or we're talking about
we're talking about
moths,
invertebrates
butterflies, all
like
that stuff.
crustaceans and lobsters, now protected in the United Kingdom. And yeah, we're talking about ants and other animals. And, they have very powerful senses of smell. So that might be the underlying sense for having certain feelings. So I feel right now that given what we know and how much we don't know, we shouldn't be line drawing. First of all, it's dangerous because, humans have done that among humans for a really long time, and it's had disastrous social consequences. But as a biologist, scientist, let's just keep the door open. Nothing's lost by doing it. Some people will say, well, yeah, what's lost is if you think an animal isn't sentient or doesn't have strong feelings, we can abuse them. So it becomes very utilitarian. What can their utility is what they can do for us. And if we don't think that they have feelings or feel pain or joy, then we can do anything we want. So your question's a really good one. And I just say, let's follow the science and let's see what we learn.
So I know you said you feel that they experience similar emotions, but in what you were calling a species appropriate way, I think you said. And so this is really interesting because I've been thinking about this for the last few days, which is really funny. And I didn't realize the coincidence that we were going to have this podcast. But so a few days ago, I saw I was just driving down a mountain road, and this person in front of me hit a baby turkey.
Yeah.
Little guy just crossing the road with mom. And mom was on, and then so I stopped to see if he was maybe just got pummeled over and he was still alive, and I'd bring him to the other side of the road. And so I stopped and I heard mom calling him. And I don't mean to make this a dark moment, but it's just interesting because I think it's really relevant. So she comes out of the bushes with her wings kind of bent like this, as if she's trying to like shelter the baby.
Mm-hmm.
And she looked so distressed, and she was just running around this baby for a while.
Mm-hmm.
And I was trying to coax her back across the street because there's cars flying. I'm like, no, she's going to get hit. And she has 6 babies in the woods that are not going to make it if she gets hit. But she just wouldn't leave this baby for a while. And she was making the craziest sounds I've ever heard a turkey make. And she was just trying to shelter it so much. And I couldn't help thinking for days, because I'm a new father, right? And so I don't know how many new parents are listening, but as you know, you literally cannot stop thinking about protecting your baby. I mean, I can't stop thinking about protecting him all day. It's constant. It's 24 hours a day. I never stop thinking about it.
Yep.
I wonder how close, I know she's experiencing something, but I wonder how close to what it would be like if a human mother were experiencing it. Is she experiencing it to that level? Like, what is she, and I'm just curious what you think about that.
It's a great question, because it pertains to a number of things. I don't know if her grief would be the same as mine or yours, or even maybe another bird, but she is feeling something very deeply, and yes, equally deeply. And in the book, I have that story of a prairie dog trying to rescue a corpse off the road. And verifying it, with another cyclist, she was really distressed. Yeah, and so in the book, I write about a number of things, but I write about what I call a magpie funeral that I saw when I was riding my bike into Boulder, and I was with a friend of mine who knows nothing about this. He verified it, which was good, and the week or two later, I got a video from a woman in Canada that showed the exact same ritual I saw. So, for magpies. So, were her magpies, experience the same thing as my magpies or your turkey? We don't know. But it's really interesting to me, because I do still read a lot of science. I am a scientist. Is there's been some papers written about avian funerals, avian grief rituals. And so I have not heard one good answer to the question, well, why can't they have them? Somebody might say they're bird brains, which is really a mistake, since we know birds can do most amazing cognitive things. So, yeah, and your question is really good. And I've written a lot about how comparing, if you will, the depth of emotions across species is fraught with error. Okay, I mean, there's just something going on in the turkey you saw, in the magpie I saw, in the other birds that people have seen, that compels them to go out and do something with that corpse. Maybe they think it's alive. Maybe they know that the corpse is not alive and they want to just bring it home and grieve. I don't know, but I love your question, because it's like these questions are cats smarter than dogs? Are dogs smarter than fishes? Biologically, that's meaningless. Intelligence is an adaptation, and animals learn what they need to do to stay alive. And humans are not particularly better than other animals as learning and then implementing what it takes to stay alive. No, yeah. Oh, I love that question, because so many people say, like, I'm not a dog trainer, but I've written about dogs. They'll say, well, I'm not getting a dog, I'm getting a cat because I can leave them alone for a week. And I'm going, really? I mean, cats are social. It's just that myth in the literature that they're not, and sometimes people get really upset with me.
They don't express it like dogs do, for sure.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I mean,
but they are social. Yeah.
It's so funny. When I went to DC, and I came back because like our two cats that we have, they basically split off. We say like one is my wife's, the other one is mine. Yeah. Like just they sort of pick their person kind of a thing. Yeah. And I'll be working and he'll jump up on me and he just wants to be by me. And I was gone for, I don't know, probably 24 hours, 30, whatever it was. And I came back and I walked in the door and immediately it's like he knew I came back and his like tail was straight up. He's immediately like he's like meowing at me, looking at me, and he's like kind of like, where have you been, man? Like you weren't working yesterday. We weren't hanging out. And the more it resonates so much, Stephen, just like you were saying with that turkey story, but to our own animals, and you know, we had 3 dogs before, and when they all had their unique personalities, we know this for a fact. Like, it's just so incredibly fascinating to see the changes of that stuff, because I've never had cats of my own, to see the difference in that and to understand that there is this deep bond that I wouldn't have really understood because of I've worked with canines or had canines my whole life. And so to see this, I was like, I joke and say they act like dogs. So it makes me feel, I guess, more comfortable, but it's so unique and different.
Yes. And I really love that example. Just because of all the myths that are out there on, say, cats versus dogs. But, you know, years ago, some real well-known ethologists studied cats. And, you know, one of their first, if you will, conclusions was cats are highly social. They just don't express it like dogs, because the cat-dog comparison is one you see all the time. Cats are smarter than dogs. Dogs are smarter than cats.
Depends.
It just depends on context. But the species-wide, stereotypes can be very damaging, because I know someone who leaves their cat alone for a long time, and they love the cat and they love their dog, and they would never leave their dog alone for that amount of time.
Wow.
Yeah. So
yeah. So I think the thing that I'm still so curious about is if we all sort of feel the same emotions, or at least the same list of emotions, is there any kind of meaningful distinction that should be drawn between humans and animals emotionally? Like a thing that comes to mind right now as I'm saying it is, and I wonder why we are different in this way. And disclaimer for anyone sensitive to the topic of suicide, just skip this question, because that is what I'm going to ask about. The fact that humans, maybe even humans experiencing what I was saying this turkey looked like it was experiencing, they may come to a place of being suicidal as a product of experiencing that, or they may put themselves in harm's way in a very conscious way to respond to that experience. And that concept of suicide, that as humans we can get to that point, as far as I know, animals don't commit suicide intentionally. What does that say about our emotional capacity, or what makes us unusual in the animal kingdom?
I've written a couple of stories for my Psych Today site about, you might call it apparent suicide in a non-human animal. But there are some people who I really respect who, a lot of it swings back to, do non-humans have a concept of death? Do they know if they do something they'll die? I don't know. I tend to think sometimes that our human concept of death and dying, or impending death, or if I run out in front of that car to save somebody, I may get killed, is different. But there's actually a lot of people now who think that what we're guilty of is using human concepts of, say, death, and attributing to non-humans, and so once again, I leave the door open on that. But I've seen stories of, and I'm not sure this is exactly what you're saying, but I think it's close. Is of a parent running back into a collapsing house on fire to grab their kid. And first of all, I don't think I mean, and I don't know this, I've never done that, but I don't think that they're necessarily even consciously thinking that it could be suicide.
Right, it's instinct, it's adrenaline.
You know what I mean? Yeah, it's just the adrenaline that comes in. And I years ago I knew a woman who, I can't remember the details other than she remembered that she had shut her car doors and her kid was in the car, and she was a responsible mom, and she ran across a major highway, big, 4-lane road, because she remembered it, and she ran right across it. She made it, but she could have easily, been killed. So the suicide card, as I call it, I mean, it's sad, of course. I mean, maybe we all people who have committed suicide, is an interesting one. But these stories that I've heard, they're compelling, only from the point of view that that what one was a mule, I believe. What they were doing just was so doing something new that did they know it was going to end their life? I don't know. You know what I mean? But I like your question. Yeah, I mean, I don't think on the emotional level that, and what I really like about this, and I have written about it, I'm not sure on the emotional level that we could make any kind of statements about depth or knowledge that would be real satisfactory to me. But cognitively, yeah, we can do things, we can build computers and cars and things like that. But cognitively, non-human animals do amazing things, like the bower birds building these bowers, or the architecture of like an ant hill or prairie dog tunnels. I mean, something's going on there that they know that we don't know. So, really, that's the reason I just think these comparisons are useless, because some people say, well, they don't have the brains we do, but look at what they do. And I'm saying, well, they don't need to have the brains we do to do what they're doing. You know what I mean?
That's true. Yeah. I mean, they're wired differently. Yeah. To do different things.
Yeah. And if every living being had the intelligence that we had, we'd probably be in worse shape.
I actually, yeah. I think my immediate response is I agree.
Yeah, definitely.
But I'm not sure. But yeah, we are unique in some ways, and so too are other animals. And that's something I've written a lot about, that, yeah, we are unique. But so too are other animals. We're unique in having significant wars. You know what I mean? And people say, building, equipment that can kill others at a long range. I don't think there's any animal who makes a drone. And I'm not even saying that as a value judgment. What I'm saying is that if we look hard enough at the cognitive and emotional lives of animals, we need to be really sensitive to the differences, but also the striking similarities. Yeah.
Yeah, totally agree. I mean, going forward, Marc, because there's been such an advancement and an acceptance, I believe, in this type of research, in this looking at anthropomorphism and looking at it differently, as like you said, it's evolved and changed over the last 30 years. Where do you think this type of research incorporation into policy, do you think this stuff will continue to evolve and change in a positive way? As a card carrier of optimism myself, and I'm with you on that. Do you feel, or do you see, in your opinion, in your life, that this is going to be something that people will take more notice of and continue to incorporate in these things to hopefully bring the playing field, or the emotional playing field, up to an equal standard between humans and animals?
I'd like to believe it. And I think it's sometimes like, Sisyphus, you go up two, back one, up two, back one. So there's a little progress. But what I find really disarming or really alarming would be the fact that rats and mice in a major country are still not considered to be animals. And that last year, the number of pigs who could be thrown into, if you will, a slaughter line has increased, And there was just something in the news recently about, I can't remember what state, just basically not legalizing, but, touting their killing contests, you know what I mean, that you could go back to what Colorado and 6 or 7 other states have outlawed. So I am optimistic, and really my optimism, since I do a lot of work with Jane Goodall, she's a good friend, a colleague, and I do a lot of got a lot of work with her Roots and Shoots groups, is educating kids. That's really what I think the future is all about. And kids are generally and younger people are pretty much an easy sell on the fact that animals have emotions, although they might not be able to articulate it that way. And so I think the change is it's slightly an upward curve, going far too slowly for me, but I think there's enough young kids. I work with grad students now who want to do more in the area of compassionate conservation and not harm animals to learn about them. So that's where a lot of my optimism goes, comes from. But I think, other adults like us have an obligation to engage in, for lack of a better term, humane education, to humanely educate not only kids, but adults as well. And so, yeah, I do, but it ain't going to happen overnight. I would like it to happen overnight, but it's not going to happen overnight. So I think that I'd like to believe the resolution line is going upward. That's how and I believe it is, but sometimes it goes so slowly, you just can't even see the progress. It's like walking or riding your bike up a grade that's about 0.1%. So you're still going uphill.
But it's just taking longer, yeah.
But it's taking a little longer, yeah. But that's why, honestly, in a very personal way, that's why I do the things I do. That's why I like writing these books and talking to people about it. You got to, like you all, and what you do, the best route out there is get the word out and have these open and frank discussions. It really is. And having people, if you will, walk the talk. It's easy to say one thing and do another. And I don't mean that in an obnoxious way. I just mean, like when people say they love dogs and yet they harm them, or they go hunting and love deer, I always say, I'm glad you don't love me. Because it gets a discussion going, and because of my work on dogs, and I think, I've mentioned it in this book and elsewhere, I like to think of dogs as being what I call a gateway species for bridging the empathy gap. So with the situation with wolves in Colorado now, I've actually asked some people, well, yeah, you really don't care about wolves. You just go out and shoot them. You don't really care if they're trapped. Would you do it to your dog or allow your dog to be treated that way? And generally the answer is no. Every now and again, you ask somebody and you go, "Oh, I wish I hadn't asked you." But rather than increasing distance, I've had some people, they're really good people, say, "Well, why did you ask that?" And I'll simply say, "Well, all dogs come from a common wolf ancestor. They still have they basically have the same emotional equipment, if you will, cognitive capacity." It's actually gotten some people to say, and I appreciate this, I haven't thought about that. I need to think about it. Because then you're getting them to think about it and they're not just blowing you off. Because, if I say, well, there's really no difference between a dog and a wolf in terms of their emotional capacity. If nothing else, dogs might have some kind of predisposition to come to us just because of the way we've domesticated them. So that's your long answer. That, yeah, I am an optimist, but I'm I ain't expecting to see things over the next year or two get all that much better, but I hope they will.
Yeah, I wasn't going to ask another question because I assume we're wrapping up soon, but you just brought up something that I really do. I think about this all the time. So I understand that confusion around how can someone have respect for an animal and also want to hunt it for food. I understand why that's confusing, particularly for someone who maybe doesn't feel that dichotomy or that problematic feeling, and it certainly exists. So take early Americans or tribes people or natives of most continents, and they will describe sort of in detail this dichotomy or these poles where you appreciate, love, and respect wildlife and you understand wildlife, and yet it yields the hunting and consumption of said wildlife or utilization of parts of wildlife. So just in a little bit more depth, that's kind of, it seems like not just generational, but since the dawn of humanity, a concept that comes up. You know, you can find this kind of connection, this kind of storytelling in almost any culture if you go far enough back. So how do you just sort of perceive that?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I've thought a lot about it over the years. I guess I could say that I wish they wouldn't do some of the things they do, but I don't feel that I have the right to tell them not to. I really mean that. And some years ago, I was invited to a conference where it was all Native Americans, some elders. I was the only white guy in the room, and when I was told, I was thrilled to be there. They said, you can't take notes, you can't take pictures, and you can't ask questions. That's fine. I mean, I really was honored, and I'm not going to give the details because I told them I never would. But the person who invited me was a very, very well-known Native American who wrote a lot about Native American culture and rights and some work on animals. So at the end of the meeting, I just sat there, and they asked, the guy who convened the meeting asked me if I wanted to say anything. He said, which I thought was nice. He said, he told all the elders from a lot of different tribes and reservations, this is Marc Bekoff. He's a friend of mine, and I don't believe he will be judgmental, and I wasn't. And I've invited him, but he can't take notes, he can't take pictures, and he can't ask questions. But now I want to know how you feel. And that's exactly what I said. I said, from the animal's point of view, I wish you wouldn't do it. But it was just this atmosphere in there of true reverence. And I am not, I'm a white guy, and I'm not going to comment on that. In some ways, and I said this there, and I thought about it a lot. In some ways, I feel that close attachment to other animals that they do, and I've just made the choice not to do those things. But it would have been really arrogant, white-centric, if you will, to either to ask them not to, or to not really value and understand the depth of their connection, and I've been asked a very similar question, and I've used that example over the last couple of decades because I was honored to be there. I still am. I had some contact with people afterwards, and they told me that I was and they really did. They said, you are one of few, if not the only person who hasn't tried to nail us. And I just thought, as a group, you all really expressed this reverence, this closeness, using animals for food and using, if you will, every bit of the animal. It wasn't like on a factory farm, or a chicken farm. And so, and I did express myself, and it was great. Afterwards we all had some food. None of them took offense when I said, I wish you wouldn't do that, but you do it. and you have a long culture of doing it. And I still feel that way today. I wish they wouldn't, but people in my, our cohort can be awfully pushy about this is the way things should be done and have to be done. And having a wish that they weren't done is far different from prescriptively saying, you're blowing them off. Oh, you're just a bunch of whoever's, and you're not paying attention. You're not paying attention to the latest research. Somebody said that to me, and I said they know more about the behavior and emotions and the cognitive capacities of the animals who they live with and kill than you do, and I do. So there's your long-winded answer. But I really want to be clear that I think it's important to honor those sorts of things, but you can still express that you wish they didn't happen.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's beautiful that you took that stance that, I wish you wouldn't, but that's as far as I'm willing to go.
Yeah.
Because I think judging just cultures and how they eat is one of the hardest high horses to stay on. Do you know?
Yeah, I totally agree.
Yeah. It's hard. It'd be really hard to stay up there for a long time.
Yeah.
If you went around the world and talked to folks,
Yeah, they don't have. First of all, they've got cultures that are older than mine. They've thought about all these things. This was just a group of really brilliant people who are, because it wasn't the first time that they've probably asked a white guy what they think, and they don't feel they have anything to defend. And I really like that. I really, really liked the fact that there was just no defensiveness shown, because that could have shown some weakness. They were very committed to their cultures. And how could I don't know. I said, how could I disagree? You know what I mean? How could I tell them what to do?
Yeah. They just know things. Oh, yeah. That they knew things before sort of modern science had to catch up to a lot of the things they already knew. Oh. Yeah, I do find it a very interesting topic, just cultures that are very connected with wildlife and do have this deep understanding of wildlife and do have this deep respect for wildlife. They almost feel as though they are consciously part of it, and it also yields that sort of participating in the life and death of wild animals and the consumption and utilization of wild animals. So I think that it's kind of hard to escape that there is something interesting about that connection, about those two sort of things living in the same body.
Well, they're not doing it in a hierarchical, I'm superior to you way.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's what you were just saying. And I'll give you one more example before we close, because in my book, Rewilding Our Hearts, I think it was in that book, I wrote about an example where there was some kind of problem in India. And, people were getting 2-year NSF grants and 2-year grants from X, Y, and Z to go over and solve it. And they couldn't. And some of the people this was in, India, in the Indian community, they were almost humored by this, because they said, look, this problem has been repeating itself for 4,000 years. And right. We may not solve it, but we know a way to slow it down using utterly to me, illogical, non-scientific methods.
Exactly.
And they did, so
exactly.
So this guy who wrote about it, and I believe I talked to him on the phone when I was writing Rewilding Our Hearts. He said, yeah, he said, what they do, and I can't remember, what they do is absolutely illogical. Nobody from out of the culture would think about it, but they've been dealing with this for thousands of years. So it's a problem that's going to come and go, but they know how to get rid of it, at least temporarily. One of the guys said, so all this money that NSF and other places are putting into it is just a waste of money, because number one, our families go back hundreds of thousands of years. And number two, you're not going to solve this problem in 24 months.
Exactly. Unbelievable. Yeah, I think it's amazing.
I like this because I am a pluralist to some extent on a lot of things, but this is one where I just accept the pluralism. I don't want them telling me what to do. And if I don't want somebody telling me what to do, I don't have the right or permission to tell them what to do.
I mean, that's great.
Yeah, no, this is beautiful. Great. What a great discussion. Thank you.
Man, no, this has been a real, incredibly diverse, insightful, knowledgeable. This is so great, Marc. Thank you so much but just tell everybody where they can go to find your books, your essays, everything to really encompass all of the work that you have done and are continuing to do.
Well, thank you. And really, I love these discussions. And if you ever want me back, I'm there. I really do. I just think that we need to get the word out to people. I sometimes assume that everybody does what I do, or you might assume that everybody does and knows what you do. So this wolf issue is really good. Like in this thing I wrote today, a lot of people are pro-wolf and they had no idea wolves could be killed, right? So I'm not telling them what to do, but they had no idea, and they have no idea about the depth of animal sentience, what I call the biodiversity of animal sentience. So let's do it again. You guys are really
easy.
Yeah, this is great.
This was fantastic.
Yeah, I think actually even before we started talking, John and I were like, and we'll probably need to have a second one after this one.
I already knew it right off the bat.
Get me here.
Yeah, John already knew it.
Well, this is easy to do. I'm more than happy to, and it's nice that you're in Durango.
There you go.
Absolutely.
That's so awesome.
Thank you.
Man, yeah. Marc Bekoff, just hang tight while we sign off. But man, if you guys, once again, I will promote the book till the day I'm not here. The Emotional Lives of Animals, pick it up, read it. It's actually a fairly short read. I think it's absolutely essential for people to read this and take something out of it to know that we need to be more compassionate to our animal, all of the animals and the plants and everything that's here in the world. Marc Bekoff, thank you so much. How's to all y'all out there, and we'll be with you next time. Bye, everybody. Looking for more information about Wolf Connection or the podcast? Please visit our website at wolfconnection.org, where you can donate, sponsor a wolf, or become a volunteer.